activated against the children of the prophets, still languishing under spiritual captivity in America and the world. A review of historical events leading up to the speech and following it caused this speech to assume prophetic significance.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Once again, many are familiar with the words expressed by Dr. King in this speech, yet our spiritual investigation requires us to take an even closer look at the statements uttered by King and to focus specifically on certain biblical metaphors which he employed in the mountaintop speech. We are reminded once again of the necessity of certain words being spoken before certain events can take place or achieve their full significance. As we replay the melody of the mountaintop speech again in our minds, we extract the following terms in sequential order: mountaintop, promised land, and the coming of the Lord. Let's ponder these terms and their biblical and symbolic nature for a moment. Let us also factor that during the final phase of his work, Dr. King expanded his focus beyond civil rights in America for so-called Negroes to larger issues of international human rights and justice for oppressed people of the world. With this focus in mind, are we left to conclude that Dr. King's ultimate vision was greater access to material possessions such as houses and cars, greater social mobility, and better jobs? Somehow the ends do not seem to justify the means, nor to honor the message. When we are left to do the math, we can only conclude that maybe we made a bad deal.
Tomorrow may be too late. The book may close. And don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, "You are too arrogant. If you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power, and I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name. Be still and know that I'm God."
The diabolical plot activated against Dr. King was only part of a larger scheme crafted by the Federal Bureau of Investigations known as the Counterintelligence Program, or COINTELPRO. The purpose of COINTELPRO, to quote its architect and mastermind, J. Edgar Hoover, was to prevent the rise of a black messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Electrify the masses to do what and for whom? Just as when the winds of change began to blow over the people in ancient Egypt and crafty counsel was taken to suppress that spirit, similar forces began to seek the same objective in America, modern-day Egypt. With Dr. King removed from consideration for the messianic charge, we can state with certainty that just as Moses was permitted to ascend to the mountaintop, see the promised land, but not to enter it, it was not Dr. King's prophetic destiny to be the one who would lead the children of the prophets back home to the promised land. Nonetheless, within approximately 1 month of Dr. King's mountaintop speech, the African Hebrew Israelites returned to their ancestral homeland, represented by Prince Hezekiah and His Excellency Ben-Ami, to scout the land and prepare for the great ingathering and the establishment of the long-awaited Kingdom of God. And what was to become of Dr. King's dream of the beloved community, where truth, justice, mercy, equity, joy, happiness, love, and peace could be found? Dr. King's dream and the civil rights struggle would give way and find even greater meaning and expression in the long-awaited kingdom of Yah on earth, a government of men and women governed by the Holy One of Israel. For biblical support of this prophetic event, we submit for the record the inspired word of the prophets recorded in the book of 2 Chronicles and the book of the prophet Daniel. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and will forgive their sin, and will heal their land. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. With the death of Dr. King setting off riots in the urban centers of America, the African in America entered into a new era, post-civil rights. Better jobs, greater social mobility, and access to material gains had become available to be had, yet the social and economic conditions of the communities declined even beyond the state of the so-called ghettos of the 1960s. Even in corporate America and the upwardly mobile sectors of Black America, the frustrations and anger resulted in a syndrome which became known as the rage of successful blacks. Thus we see the prophecies of Deuteronomy 28 still holding sway over our people languishing into captivity. The riots would create the smokescreen protecting the escape of the Israelites from America to contend with Yah Kadosh Yisrael face to face in the jungles of Liberia. With the Exodus of 1967, the Israelites had turned the page from the prophecies of Deuteronomy 28 over to Deuteronomy 30, where they would be regathered to their homeland and judgment would commence on their tormentors, the Euro-Gentile world system. For the house of Israel, this prophetic shift began the era known as post-judgment. Before them now lay the blessed opportunity to make the crucial choice, literally a life or death proposition, to choose between the death style they had known in the captivity or to create a new and better lifestyle in service to Yah and to humanity. To make these statements without a proper and orderly presentation of the information provided to us from historical and prophetic resources would be irresponsible, and it would seem outlandish and far-fetched. But with this information, we now gain the foundation to go back and analyze the religious terminology referenced by Dr. King earlier. Let's begin with the mountaintop. If interpreted literally, of course it would not provide us with a full understanding of what the prophets meant. For a more in-depth explanation, let's reference the book of Isaiah. A mountain in scriptural symbolism means a kingdom, authority, or rule. Thus we find the prophets using the symbol of a mountain to express an authority or a government that was specifically to come at the end of Euro-Gentile world dominion. Turning our attention to the stone, cut without hands. Once again we must reference Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon's dream, and the prophet Daniel's interpretation of that dream. Before this mountain could come into existence for people to travel there to be taught, there first had to be this stone, representing a government or kingdom of smaller proportions and scope. According to the Scofield Study Bible, this stone must not be identified with the church as some may hold, for the task of the church is never said to be the destruction of the nations of the earth. Furthermore, we emphasize that it would be historically out of context to connect this stone with religious church institutions per se, because no such institutions had come into existence during the time of the prophets. Prophetically speaking, there would come a time, or a dispensation, known as the church age. This particular age would serve as the sixth station toward a complete cycle of 7 dispensations. It was prophesied that the dispensation of the church age would ultimately end with the events taking place during the last days of the Euro-Gentile anti-Yah dominion. The close of the church age would give way to the final dispensation and chapter of the prophetic unfoldment of the plan of Yah, the kingdom age. The church corporately is not in the vision of the Old Testament prophet. The final restoration of Israel is secured in the kingdom, and the source of blessing in the kingdom is the king, who is not only David's son, but also Emmanuel. Here we must call to your attention that the prophets came with a message specifically for the house of Israel. We see here that the kingdom age would once again manifest the presence of the Spirit of David, or Emmanuel, which in Hebrew literally means God or Yah is with us. As pertains to our current discussion of the events prophesied to take place during the last days, we must explore another extremely significant and widely misunderstood term, the apocalypse. If we were to casually ask most people what their concept of the apocalypse is, most of their responses would immediately refer to the book of Revelation and refer to some form of cataclysmic or destructive events, possibly to include the destruction of the earth itself. While there are cataclysmic events connected with the events of the last days, these events should be seen as byproducts of the actual event spoken of by the prophets. Furthermore, this event does not include the physical destruction of the earth. The word revelation, from the late Latin revelatio, which means, as does the Greek apocalypsis, from which the English word apocalypse is derived, disclosure of that which was previously hidden or unknown. As we continue to build our case and properly interpret biblical symbolism via Hebrew thought, it naturally flows that since the apocalypse or resurrection actually references a form of knowledge, the day of the Lord references the observable manifestation of this form of knowledge, breaking forth and serving as the prophetic healing agent for the peoples of the earth. Even Christian theological institutions teach that the resurrection would bring forth salvation. Yet we must ask ourselves the question if the definition of salvation provided by these institutions is actually in alignment with the original intent of the prophets. Once again, we find that we must separate fact from fiction and the truth from the lie. The incredible hoax perpetrated by the anti-Yah civilization promotes the idea that all one has to do in order to claim that they are born again is just say that they are now saved. Aside from trying to lead an honest life, no other changes would be necessary. No consideration has ever been given to such significant activities as personal dietary habits or lifestyle. Thus, this would leave the person completely prone and powerless to maintain good health or to defend his or her life from the inevitable consequences of chronic and persistent abuse of the delicate balance required to sustain the systems of the body and sustain life.
Homeless
The historic election of United States President Barack Obama and the ensuing euphoria that followed has caused many writers to seize upon the concept of the Promised Land and imply that now America has to be that long-awaited Promised Land. Well, it definitely is, and it definitely is not. In the sense of the curses promised to a people moving contrary to the laws and instructions of Yah, America has definitely fulfilled those promises. However, the original concept of the Promised Land, as expressed by the prophets, meant something entirely different altogether. The constitutional compromise over slavery, which was reached in 1788, caused the writers of the Constitution to state that for voting purposes, all of the people who were currently classified as slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a human being. The Emancipation Proclamation, brought forth by U.S. President Abraham Lincoln, the so-called Great Emancipator, was an incredible hoax perpetrated upon the pages of history, which actually only freed slaves that were completely out of the jurisdiction of the United States of America. Because the